How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Zayin, Daf 7 of Masechta Kiddushin, friends. Yo, friends. What can I tell you about Masechta Kiddushin? It's relative, Daf Zayin and Masechta Kiddushin. Relatively interesting. The first chunk of the Daf is kind of almost like Yevamasi. Not like Yevamas to the extent that we're talking about sisters and stuff, but whatever, just like Yevamasi to the extent that you have to set up the case. Remember Masechta Yevamos was all about setting up the case. So you're going to have to set up some cases. And then we get to some Gemaras that we saw in Masechta Kiddushin, then we get to Masechta Gittin, and then we get to a bunch of tekus. What's your take on tekus? My take on tekus is they kind of drive me crazy a little bit, because there are always these outlandish kind of things that are not very practical, and you got to figure out what it is, just because you have to understand the Gemara. But it's always all right, leave me alone. Teku means leave me alone, right? So it's just, I don't know, don't come up with such theoretical stuff. So they always become a shtickle run around, but nothing too crazy over here. All right, we're going to start in Daf Vav Amud Beis all the way at the bottom by the two dots. Oh my Ravis. Whoa, Balayon. So says Ravi. Teinmana lefloni v'akadesh lecha mikudeshes midin ari. Friends, do you hear the case? The case is, and this is what I was saying, Yevamis, right? So we have Sarah, Shimon, and Reuven. So Sarah tells Shimon, hey Shimon, go give some money to Reuven, and if you give money to Reuven, I will be mikudeshes to you. Okay? So Shimon goes ahead and he gives money to Reuven. When he gives money to Reuven, he says to Sarah, his kad shili be mikudeshes to me. So we say mikudeshes. That works midin ariv. Just like in ariv, just like a guarantor. Ariv lavafagav de lo moti anoya liyodei kamishabed nafshe. By a guarantor. What's the example of a guarantor? Levi says to Shimon, Shimon, go ahead and lend money to Reuven. I will guarantee it. So what's Levi? What's going on over there with Levi? So let's read that again. Avagav de lo moti anoya liyodei. Levi is not getting any benefit. Right? Reuven's the one making the money. Reuven's the one getting the loan. Levi's just guaranteeing it. He's not getting any benefit. Kamishabed nafshe, and still he's being mishabed himself to the loan. So hayitza. So similarly, Sarah, this fiance to be, Nami afagav de lo moti anoya liyodo. Even though she's not getting anything, Reuven is the beneficiary. Kamishabed mekanya nafshe. She's being mishabed and mekanya herself to Shimon. Okay, fine. That was case number one. We're going to have a few different cases. Next case. Heilach mono v'eskadshi lifloni mikudeshes midin eved knaini. Okay. Now in this case, what's going on? In this case, Reuven is the one who's looking to get engaged to Sarah. Reuven says to Shimon, he makes Shimon a shaliach, and he says to Shimon, be mikadesh Sarah for me. Now Reuven does not give Shimon any money. Shimon is going to give Sarah his own money, okay? So Reuven sends Shimon to be Mekadesh Sarah. Shimon meets up with Sarah, he opens up his wallet, he takes out some of his own money, and he gives it to Sarah, and he says, be Mikudeshes to Reuven. And we're saying that works. So again, so Heilach Mano, Shimon says to Sarah, take this money, Vizkachi Lifloni, and by accepting it, be Mikudeshes to Reuven. Mikudeshes, that's fine, it works. Midin, Eved Knaini, just like an Eved Knaini. What's the case in Eved Knaini? In Eved Knaini, he's talking about a case where you have a fellow, he's an Eved Knaini, and he's to a master, and other people come up with, right, now an Eved Knaini can go free, he can buy his way to freedom. So if other people come up with some money and pay the money to the master, so the Eved Knaini can now go free. So now in this case, so Eved Knaini lav afagav de loka choser v'lo midi. David Kanaini is not paying any money. It's his benefactors who are coming up with the money to pay the master so that he can go free. Kakani navshe, and still he's making a kinyan. He's making a kinyan on himself. So Hai Gavra, so also Reuven, Nami afagav de lo kachosav lo midi, he's not spending any money. Shimon's the one spending the money. Kakani lo laitza, he's still being kone. Sorry. Okay. Case number 3. This one's sort of more complex because it's a combination of the first two. Teimana lifloni, va'akadesh ani lo. So in this case, in the first case, she had said, Sarah had said to Shimon, give money to Reuven and I'll be Mekudeshes to you, Shimon. In this case though, Sarah is saying to Shimon, give money to Reuven and I'll be Mekudeshes to Reuven. Okay? So again, Teimana lefloni, hey Shimon, can you give money to Reuven? V'akadesh ani lo, and then by you giving money to Reuven, I will be Mekudeshes to him, that Reuven accepts the money and says, Iskad Shili. Okay. Mikudeshes midin shneim, that works. You can kind of put together an explanation for why it works, both from Arev, the guarantor, and from Eved Kenani. Arev, lav afalgav, delo kamati, hanoya liyode, komishabed nafshe. We said that by the Arev, by the guarantor, by Levi, who's guaranteeing the loan to Reuven, again, lav afalgav, delo kamati, hanoya liyode. He's not benefiting at all. Nothing is coming his way. Komishabed nafshe, and still he's being mishabed himself to this loan. So, it's tsunami. So also Sarah in this case, afagav lokamoti anoy liyodo, she's not gaining anything. Reuven's the one gaining. Komekanya nafsha, and yet she is being makne herself to Reuven. To which the Gemara says, but wait, that won't suffice. To learn out only from Arev would not be enough, because midami is the case of Kiddushin similar to the case of Arev. Arev, haidika koni lei kachosu mamona. When it comes to the Arev, haidika koni lei. I'm reading that again. When it comes to the Arev, the one who's being kone from the Arev, i.e. Shimon, right? Meaning the Arev is committing himself. I can't remember if that's the right word. I think committing works. Being mechayev himself, he's obligating himself, he's committing himself. I think that's fine. So the Arev is being committing himself to Shimon. Shimon is the beneficiary of, I don't know what I'm saying, the Arev, which is Levi, right? So Levi is committing to Shimon to guarantee the loan. Shimon is the beneficiary of Levi's commitment. Kachos Mamona, and Shimon is the one who's paying the money to Reuven. But in our case, where Sarah says to Shimon, give money to Reuven, Reuven is the beneficiary of Sarah's being committing to the engagement, to the betrothal. Where am I? But here Reuven is the beneficiary in that he's being kone Sarah v'lo kachosur v'lo midi, and he's not spending any money. So again, in the case of the guarantor, Shimon was the beneficiary of Levi's commitment, and he Shimon is the one who's paying the money to Reuven. But in this case, Reuven is the beneficiary of Sarah's commitment, but he's the one receiving money. He's not paying any money. So Eved Kanani yochiach, but that is where we turn our attention to the Eved Kanani. The local chosur mamona, the Eved Kanani is not spending any money. There are sponsors. There are people who are sponsoring his freedom. He's not spending anything. V'kakoni nafshe, and he's the beneficiary of him taking control of his own self. So we see that from Eved Kanani, we could say that just like the Eved Kanani does not spend any money, and yet he's the beneficiary. So also Reuven is not spending any money, but he's the beneficiary of Sarah's Kiddushin. But midami, can you compare the Kiddushin to the Eved Kanani? By the Kiddushin, by the Eved Kanani, the one who's freeing the Eved, the one who's being makne, the one who's kind of, saying, okay, Eved Kanani, goodbye and good luck, Kakani, he's the one who's making the money, right? The master who's freeing the Eved is also receiving the money and making the money from the sponsors. But in this case, Sarah is being makne herself to Reuven, Kamakne nafsha, she's been makne herself to Reuven, velo kakanya, velo midi, and she's not receiving anything. Reuven is the one receiving the money. But Arev yochiach, that's where we turn our attention back to Arev, afagav delo kamati anoy liyode, that even though Levi is not receiving anything when he guarantees the loan to Reuven, Mishabed nafshe, and nonetheless he's Mishabed himself. So here also, even though Sarah doesn't receive anything, she's nonetheless committing herself to the Kiddushin. Okay, fine. So we just gave 3 cases. One was from Arev, one was from Eved Kanani, one was from a combination of the 2. Now we're going to have a 4th case. By Rave asks Akasha, Heilach mono, take this mono, ve'akadish ani lecha. Okay, you hear this case? Sarah says to Shimon, there's no Reuven in this case, but I'm just going to say Shimon just because we've been talking about Sarah and Shimon. Or how about this? Let's not talk about Reuven, Shimon, Sarah. Let's talk about a fellow and a fella. A fella gives money to a fellow, right? Again, by Rava, Heilach mono, so a fella gives money to a fellow, V'akadish ani licha, and by receiving this money, I will be mikudeshes to you, right? So he receives the money, and when he receives the money, he says to her, his kad shili, be mikudeshes to me. Ma, what's the aloch? So Amar Marzutra mishmei to Rav Papa mikudeshes. So it says Marzutra in the name of Rav Papa that mikudeshes. It works. A fellow can give money to a fellow and say, take this money and I will be mikudeshes to you. Omerle Rav Ashi the Marzutra, Rav Ashi asks Marzutra, I don't understand. Im kain havle nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis niknin im nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis. V'onan ipchotanan nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis niknin im nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis. Because it's b'shtar v'chazaka. Do you understand the kasha? We'll read it again in a second. But the kasha is this. We learned this, I think, in Masechta Gittin. And there's a concept of nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis niknin in nechosim she'yesh lehem achrayis. That what's nechosim she'yesh lehem achrayis? Property, karka. What's nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis? Metaltalin. So if you have a field, and on the field there's epis pizza, so then if a person is kona the field, he purchases the field, he also purchases the pizza that's on the field. So right, so that's right. So if you kona the property, you're also kona the movable objects that are on the property. But it doesn't work fakert. It doesn't work the other way around. If you're kona the pizza, that's not going to enable you to be kona the property. Now over here, the fella is giving to the fellow money. Money is metaltalin, it's movable objects. And she's saying by accepting, being moshech, by accepting and being kona these movable objects, this money, I will now be mikudeshes to you. So now we know by avodim, for example, avodim are compared to karka. So we're saying that people are compared to karka, and therefore we would treat in this case this woman, this fella, as nechosim she yesh lehem achrayis. And if that's the case, by giving this fellow money, which is nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis, she's now mikudeshes to him, and she's nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis, which means that nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis niknin nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis, and that's not true. That's backwards. So let's read that again. So Amar le Rav Ashi the Marzutra. So Rav Ashi asks Marzutra, Im kain, if so that a fellow can give a fellow money and say that I'm mikudeshes to you. Im kain avli nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis niknin im nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis. Well, that would mean that nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis, i.e. her, is being nikne by way of nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis, i.e. the money that she's giving him. V'anan ipchotanan, yet we learn fakert. Nechosim she'ein lehem achrayis niknin im nechosim sheyesh lehem achrayis, because of b'shtar b'chazaka. That movable objects that are on a property can be acquired together with the property when the property is acquired either through money, through a document, or chazaka, right, doing something to the field to show ownership, for example, putting up fences and things. So Amar le, so Rav Ashi responds, no. Marzutra responds to Rav Ashi, Misaver to Amar le agav. Do you think that what she's saying, what you're describing is not what's happening? She's not saying accept this money, and then when you accept this money, you will also get me thrown in. No, that's not what it's saying. Here we're talking about a choshev a mensch, a very fancy fellow. With the benefit that this fellow is accepting her gift, she is mekanya nafsha. I was thinking of, I once saw that there's this a Jew, a Holocaust survivor Jew, that is a tailor, and he makes suits for all the presidents of the United States. So I imagine he doesn't charge the President of the United States. He gives it as a gift. I also imagine that it's not so easy. If I wanted to give a gift to the President of the United States, I mean, where do I even get started, right? Maybe I have to call up an agent, and maybe I have to pay somebody, and then only then would the President of the United States accept a gift from me, right? In Adam Chashuv, right, just to accept, just for that person to accept a gift from you could have some kind of, people would be willing to pay to have them accept a gift from you, right? So therefore, in Adam Chashuv, right? So therefore, theoretically, maybe there's some kind of agent that would theoretically be willing to pay that agent a fee to tell this Adam Chashuv, here's this gift for you, accept it. So when she gives, therefore, when she gives this money to the Adam Chashuv, and wow, this Adam Chashuv is accepting it from me directly, that value that theoretically a person would pay for an Adam Chashuv to accept a gift, that has value, and with that, she's now receiving that value by him receiving the gift from her, and with that value that she's receiving, she's being mikudeshes with that value. Itmai was stated mishmei, nami mishmei drava v'chein inin mamona, and the same thing applies to mominous, to monetary things. So meaning, for example, we said that if we take the first case, that if Sarah says to Shimon, give money to Ruvain and then I'll be mikudeshes to you, Shimon. So you could say the same thing by a field, right? If Sarah owns a field and she says to Levi, pay money to Ruvain and then my field belongs, if Sarah owns a field, she says to Shimon, pay money to Ruvain and then my field will belong to you. So the same thing. The first case is talking about Kiddushin, the second case is talking about a field, but the same thing would apply. V'tzricha, and we need to teach the halachis both by fields as well as by Kiddushin. Diashminun Kiddushin, if we'd only say that these arrangements are valid by Kiddushin, Mishum do itzo nichala b'choldu, because, even in a situation where she's not receiving the money, right? If Sarah says to Shimon, pay Ruvain money and then I'll be mikudeshes to you, and she's not receiving anything, still, even though it's not ideal, she'd be willing to do it because, Kid Rish Lakish, like Rish Lakish, the Amar Rish Lakish tav lemeitav tandu milemesav armelu. That, better to be married and not be alone. And, if in order to get married, it means that she has to forego receiving the Shava Pruta, and instead she's saying to Shimon, pay Ruvain, and then I'll be mikudeshes to you, and she's not receiving any value. Okay, it doesn't really bother her, because at least she'll be married in the end. And that's better than being alone. Avamamona, but when it comes to money, aim alone. No, when it comes to the field, these arrangements don't work if she's not going to be receiving the money for the field. So we say no, even the arrangements work by mominus. If she says to Shimon, pay Ruvain, then my field is yours, that works. V'ashmin and mamona, and if we'd only have the case of mominus, mishum disyoiv the mechila. The reason why, even if she doesn't receive value by the field, is because, look, at the end of the day, money can be mochel. A person can forego money. A person can say, look, you know what, I don't need the money. And therefore, even if she's not receiving money, the Beseder, the kinyan can work. Have a Kiddushin is not something that if a person, if I understand correctly, if a person is engaged, you can't just say, you know what, I forgo the engagement. No, you need to get a divorce. Right? It's not something that you can just forego so easily. So maybe it's not something that you could just say, you know what, forget it. I don't need the kesef. So Eimala, I would say that doesn't work. Tzricha. So therefore, we need both the case of Kiddushin as well as Mominus. On my Rave, says Rave, this is a Gemara we saw in Masechta Gittin. His kachli l'chatzoyai mikudeshes. If a fellow says to a fella, be mikudeshes to half of me, it works. Chatziech mikudeshes li. But if he says to her that I'm only being mikadesh half of you, a fellow says to a fella, that only half of you is mikudeshes to me, ain't mikudeshes. It doesn't work. Abaye says to Rav, one second. How come when he says, a fellow says to a fella, half of you is mikudeshes to me? That does not work. How come? Isha amrachmana v'lo chatzi isha, because it says ki yikach ish isha. When a fellow betroths an isha, not half an isha, a full isha. Therefore, he can't say that only half of you is mikudeshes to me. That doesn't work. But if that's the case, Abaye asks Rava, Ochanami, say the same thing say the same thing over here. Ish amrachmana v'lo chatzi ish. It says ki yikach ish. Not half a fellow, a whole fellow. And therefore, if he says, you are mikudeshes to half of me, why do we say that works? That shouldn't work. You need the whole fellow. So Omar Lei, so Rava responds to Abaye, Ochi ashta hosam. Look, when it comes to the fella, itza leveitrei lo chazia. A fella cannot be married to two fellows. Ela gavra milo chazi leveitrei, but a fellow can be married to two fellas. And therefore this is how to understand it. This is what he's saying to her. That when a fellow says to a fella, you are mikudeshes to half of me, it doesn't mean that you are literally mikudeshes to half of me. You are mikudeshes to me. Full stop. We're married. But what I'm saying is that I reserve the right to marry another woman, in which case you'll be sharing me with her. In which case you'll only have like part of my attention, right? So you are mikudeshes to half of me. You are mikudeshes to me properly, but I'm just saying that I might marry another woman as well. In which case you will be mikudesh. In which case you mikudeshes to half of me, right? Because you will have to share me with another woman. However, if he says that I am being mikadesh half of you, well, that's impossible because she can't be married to two fellows. So it can't be that he's saying that I will share you with somebody else because she can only be married to him and nobody else. So if he's being Mekadesh half of her, then he's literally only being Mekadesh half of her, and that doesn't work because you have to be Mekadesh the whole her. Okay. Fine. Amar le Marzutra Bre Dirav Mari Liravina. Says Marzutra Bre Dirav Mari Liravina, V'nifshetu la Kiddushin b'chula. But one second. But if he's Mekadesh half of her, shouldn't Mimele, the Kiddushin, apply to all of her? Right, we had said on that Beis Amid Beis that what's the lashon of Kiddushin? What does Kiddushin mean? That she's Asura Akuli Alma Kehektish. That by way of Kiddushin, she is now forbidden to everybody other than this fellow, like Hekdish, that she's also to everybody else. So Kiddushin is a lashon Hekdish. And Milotana, don't we learn in the context of Hektish, when you consecrate an animal, Ha'omer Raglo Shalzo Ola, that if a fellow says about an animal that this animal's leg is going to be an Ola, Tehei, Kula Ola, the entire animal is actually in Ola. And even according to the Mandamar who argues and says, no, the entire animal is not an Ola, that's only if he's makdish something like the leg, that the life of the animal is not dependent on the leg. You can remove the leg and the animal still lives. But everybody would agree that if you would be makdish something that it can't live without, right? Say, I don't know, you makdish the heart or something, or half the animal, I guess that includes half the heart or whatever. So in that case, the entire animal would be hekdish. So everyone agrees that if you're makdish kind of an essential part of the animal that it can't live without, the whole animal would be hekdish. So why don't we say over here as well the same thing? Meaning we had said that if he's only makdish half of her, so then she's not mekudeshes. But why not? If he's makdish half of her, if he's mekadesh half of her, and kiddushin is lashon hekdish, so if he's mekadesh half of her, then I guess like half of, draw a line down her body, half of her heart and everything. So then she can't live like that. So then she should be mekudeshes entirely. So why are we saying that if he's mekadesh half of her, ain't mekudeshes? Why don't we say if he's mekadesh half of her, ki'ilu, she's entirely mekudeshes? So, and for the Gemara Midam, you can't compare being makdish an animal to being mekadesh a woman. Hasam behema Hacha das acheres. By the animal, you don't need the consent of the animal. The animal, the animal is not going to say, hey, you were only mekadesh my leg. You're only makdish my leg. No, the animal goes along with whatever you do. It doesn't need you don't need the animal's consent. And even if you're therefore if you're makdish if you're makdish a part of the animal that everyone would agree that if you're makdish part of the animal that it can't live without, so then the whole animal is hektish. However, when you're mekadesh a woman, you're being mekadesh another person, and you need her consent, and she has das. And if you say I'm only being mekadesh half of you, and she agrees to that, to be mekadesh that only half of her is mekudeshes, well, then only half of her is mekudeshes. She didn't consent to any more than that, and therefore you are actually only being mekadesh half of her, and that's why it doesn't work. We don't say that automatically it applies to the whole her. Halodamya elah. Rather, what this case of being mekadesh half of a woman is similar to the following case, to actually being mekadesh. If you want to apply compare it to hektish, it would apply to a case where you're literally being makdish only half of the animal. That says Rabbi Yochanan, behemo shel shnei shutfin, that if you have an animal that belongs to two partners, hekdish chetzia, and then you're makdish, right? And so one of the partners is makdish his half of the animal. So now you only have half of an animal that's hektish, which obviously can't be offered as a korban. Because of the kacha, but then what he did was he purchased the other half of the animal from his partner, the kedisha, and he was makdish it. So now technically the whole animal is hektish. But initially, step one was only half of the animal, which doesn't count as hektish. But then step two, well, it can't be offered as a korban. We're going to see that half of it is hektish, but you can't offer half an animal as a korban. But then he purchases the remainder of the animal, and he's makdish that. So now technically the entire animal is hektish. So kedosha, it's technically hektish, but ve'ena kreva, but you do not offer it on the mizbeach. It cannot be offered on the mizbeach. V'osa tmura. Now, if you swap out this animal for another animal, so then that animal becomes a tmura. It also cannot be offered on the mizbeach. V'tmurasa v'osa tmura v'tmurasa kayotzeba. And also if you v'osa tmura v'tmurasa kayotzeba, right? And exactly. And also, and neither one of these animals can be offered on the mizbeach. Fine. Shema Mina Tlasim, we learn three things from this case. We said that if he's makdish half of an animal, so even if then he's makdish the other half of the animal, right? He buys the other part of the animal, he's makdish it, still it cannot be offered on the mizbeach. Shema Mina Ba'alei Chayim Nidchim. So we learn that a living animal can be what's called dachui, pushed off, right? Meaning, you have this live animal, you're first makdish only half of it. Now when you're makdish only half an animal, it obviously cannot be offered on the mizbeach. And we're saying that since it cannot be offered on the mizbeach, we're saying now it can never be offered on the mizbeach. Even if you then purchase the other half of the animal and makdish that half of the animal, no, too late, you can't fix it. It is pushed off, it cannot be offered as an animal. Vishmamina, dichui meikara abe dichui. And we also learn out that dichui meikara is dichui. What's dichui meikara? We learned about this, I think, the first time in Masechta Sukkah. There's two types of dichui. There's dichui meikara and there's nira v'nidche. Dichui meikara means that already from the outset it was not fit. So in our case, he was makdish only half the animal, which means from the very beginning of him being makdish it could not be offered on this mizbeach because he was only makdish half of it. That is as opposed to nira v'nidche would be an example of an animal that he was makdish an animal and it was fit to go on the mizbeach, but then something happened and now it cannot be put on the mizbeach, right? So we're saying that even in this case where initially it was no good, that's right, dichui meikara, that from the very beginning of the hekdesh it was already not good, you can't fix it, right? When he then purchased the other half of the animal and was makdish that, it doesn't fix it to say, well, now the whole animal's hekdesh can be offered on the mizbeach. We said it is kadosh, but it can't be offered on the mizbeach. So we say dichui meikara, that when it was from its initial state, it was already pushed off and cannot be offered, it remains that way. it's dichui. And finally we learned that there's dichui when it comes to dam. What does that mean? To money, right? There's two types of hektish. There's hektish aguf, and there's kedushas aguf, and there's kedushas damim. Kedushas aguf means that the animal itself is hektish. Kedushas damim means that only the value is hektish. What does that mean? Well, if you're maktish half of an animal, so obviously it can't be offered on the mizbeach. So what do you do with it? You're maktish half of it. What do you do with it? So you're going to have to sell it, take the money that you get from the sale and use that to buy an animal that you can offer on the mizbeach. So we see that even though this animal, when you were makdish only half of it, it was only a hektish kedushas damim. It was only a monetary hektish. Still, when he purchased the second half of the animal and was makdish that, still you cannot offer the animal on the mizbeach, because even hekdish, even a nidche by hekdish kedushas damim is nidche and cannot be fixed, right? So yesh dichui b'damim, that there's a concept of dichui even when it's only kedushas damim and it cannot be fixed. All right, that was kind of some technical stuff there. Okay, now I think be'etzim to the end of the daf, I think we just have a bunch of like teku kind of stuff. So I think it should probably only take a few minutes. We've got a bunch of tekus to do. You ready? Get your teku hat on. I got my teku hat on. I mean, I guess it's my everything hat. All right. Well, there's this hat and there's the Babylon Talmud hat. Okay, fine. Let's go weiter. Rav asked the kasha, chetziech b'chatzi pruta v'chetziech b'chatzi pruta. Okay, if a fellow says to a fellow, I'm being mekadesh half of you with half a pruta, and the other half of you with another half a pruta, so technically he's being mekadesh her with a pruta, but in two I don't know, commitments, I guess. Mao kevon de amar la chatzi pruta paska. Do we say, well, no, once he says chatzi pruta, done, right? You can't, you messed up. Oh, Dilma monavaholechu. Or maybe maybe he's just kind of, he's being mikadesher with a whole pruta, but he's just, doing one step at a time. And if you say, yeah, he's just doing one step at a time and it's fine. What if he says, I'm being mikadesh half of you with a pruta and the other half of you with a pruta? Okay, skip the next word. That goes to Vitzunim skips it. I think it makes it easier to read. Paska lemilse. Once he says pruta, done. And he had only said pruta on half of her, so he's only being mekadesh half of her. Dilma call biyome monavaholechu, or maybe he can continue, for the rest of the day. And therefore, if he says pruta for half of you, but at some point during the rest of the day he says also a pruta for the other half of you, so he's being mekadesh all of her, and maybe it's okay. And if you're going to say, well, as long as it's throughout the day, it's fine. What if he says, I'm being mekadesh half of you today with a pruta and half of you tomorrow with a pruta? Do we say, well, since he divided into 2 days, right, there's today and tomorrow, that's a problem. Maybe what he's saying to us, where the Kiddushin starts today, but they only conclude tomorrow. Okay. Both halves of you with one pruta, i.e. all of you with a pruta, but he says it like both halves of you with a pruta. And over here he's definitely saying it all in one together. So be'etzim he's being mekadesher with a pruta. Or maybe there's a low plug. Maybe you cannot be. Don't even say anything about half an isha. Just don't go there. And even if you say both of your halves with the pruta, forget about it. Take it, we say chveis nicht. Rava asks Akasha, shtei b'nosayich l'shnei bonai b'pruta. That, how about this? My 2 sons will marry your 2 daughters for a pruta. Mau. Do we say, well, it goes based on the giver of the money and the receiver of the money, and that needs to be a pruta, and a pruta was exchanged. Or do we say, no, it goes based on the couples, and each couple needs to have a shavar pruta for each. And that's not the case here, because here we have 1 pruta for both. Teku, we say chveis nicht. Papa asks Akasha, bitcho faroscha bepruta mau. If a fellow says your daughter and your cow for a pruta, Bitra b'chatzi pruta, faroscha b'chatzi pruta. Do we say, okay, well, one pruta for both of them, so he's being mekadesh his daughter for half a pruta and his cow and he's buying the cow for half a pruta, so that's a problem because you only be mekadesh her with half a pruta. Or maybe what he's saying is that no, I'm being mekadesh your daughter with a pruta and the cow I'm being koneh with meshicha. I'm going to pull it and be koneh that way. Teiku. Chveis nicht. Your daughter and your property for a pruta. Mao. Do we say that he's being mekadesh his daughter for half a pruta and he's acquiring the property for half a pruta? Or maybe what he's saying is your daughter I'm being mekadesh with the whole pruta and your property I'm going to be koneh b'chazaka. Take we say chveis nicht. Friends, that was daf zayin of Masechta Kiddushin. The first part of the daf was kind of, I said it was reminiscent of Yavamis. We had to set up a bunch of different scenarios where a woman is being mikudeshes even though she's not getting any benefit. Then we talked about a sugi that we saw in Masechta Gittin, about if he says you are mikudeshes to half of me, it works, but I'm being mikadesh only half of you, then it doesn't work. We learned some halachis about dichui. Okay, fine. And then we had a bunch of different teku scenarios. Friends, that was the Daf Zayin of Masechta Kiddushin. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.